everyone, welcome back to another Thursday Tips and Tricks. We're going to continue this episode learning how to tuckerize your patterns, and by that I mean adjusting pattern cutting instructions so that you can use Studio 180 design tools, make your units oversized, and trim them down. Last week we worked with half square triangles. This week we're going to work with another common unit that you see a lot that's called an hourglass. And like the last episode, I'm here by myself, so I need to turn the camera around and turn it so we can look at a horizontal surface. So let me do that here. If you get vertigo at all, just again, close your eyes for a minute as I turn this around so that we can then drop the camera down so that we're looking at a horizontal surface. And you're going to see the 3 steps required: recognize, analyze, and tuckerize. And here you see samples of the 2 shapes. Now, half square triangles and quarter square triangles, they kind of look the same. They're basically the same shape, but they're produced differently. When you deal with half square triangles, you want the straight of the grain to be on the too short side. When you're dealing with quarter square triangles, you want the straight of the grain to be on the long side. And I thought before we started to delve into patterns, it might be a good idea to understand a little bit about the math and why pattern writers tell you the sizes that they tell you to cut to make those hourglass units. So give me a second to clear the decks here, and we're gonna talk a little bit about the math that's involved. Now, long time ago when we were working with templates, what we would do as quilters is we would draw the template exactly the size that we wanted to be. Usually that long edge was the measurement of the square, 2 inches or 3 inches or 4 inches. And then after we drew the triangle the correct size and added the 1/4 inch around the outside, that would become our template. But there's something that happens when you do that little bit of drafting. What happens is if you take the measurement that you know and that you want your square hourglass to finish to, and when you measure the distance around the area that has the seam allowance, the difference is always the same. The difference in this length and this length is 1 1/4 inches. And that's the size squares that pattern writers tell you to use for the formula. If you know the desired size square you want to make, you would simply add 1 1/4 inches to accommodate for seam allowances on all sides, including the 2 cut diagonals. And that will give you the starter size squares to use so that when you cut them in half on both diagonal, you could create the exact size pieces that you wanted to make. The problem is there's no wiggle room in there whatsoever. So if you follow that formula and you cut those starter squares 1 1/4 inches bigger than the desired finish size, then all of your construction steps must be very precise in order for your unit to end up being very precise. And I can tell you, it doesn't happen for me. It probably doesn't happen for most of you as well. So to tuckerize, what we do is change that formula. Instead of adding just 1 1/4 inches to accommodate for the seam allowances around the triangle shape sizes that I want to end up with, I'm going to add an extra 1/4 inch. I'm going to add 1 1/2 inches. So my formula for making hourglass units is to take the desired size of the square I want to cut, or the square I want to produce, add 1 1/2 inches to that desired finished size. That will give me the size pink square and the cut size, or the starter square of the large. It will give me the size starter squares, pink and blue, that will create my unit oversized so I get to trim it down so it is the perfect size and perfect shape. So knowing a little bit about the math may help you make decisions going forward on how you want to produce hourglass units. Now, what I've done is I've gathered up 3 different publications that deal with hourglasses. This first one was December 2018. When I looked at the project in here, I could see that there were loads of hourglasses. And there were 2 different sizes. There were hourglasses in the middle that looked to be one size, and there were hourglasses in those surrounding Ohio stars that look to be a different size. And what I do when I look at a pattern and I'm going to tuckerize it, I go right to that piece. And when I go to that piece, that set of instructions, and read what it says, this one happens to give me all the information that I basically need. When I look at the hourglass and the instructions say each unit should be 3.5 inches square, including the seam allowances. Well, I know then all that I need to know in order to be able to tuckerize those. I know that if the cut size is 3.5, the finish size is going to be 3 inches, and I can go right to my Tucker trimmer set of instructions and find that information. If the finish size is going to be 3 inches, the cut size will be 3.5 inches. When I follow down the chart, I'm able to say that, oh, for those units, I want to cut them 4.5. Now let's see what the instructions tell you. The instructions tell you 4.25. Remember, that's the perfect size. No wiggle room. By going up 1/4 inch, 1.5 inch bigger than the finished size, I'm going to be making those squares oversized and able to trim them down. Now, the same thing will happen with the smaller sizes. They happen to be 2 inches finished, 2.5 inches unfinished. The pattern tells me to cut those 3 1/4 inches, but for a Tuckerize 2-inch finished hourglass, I am going to start starter squares for quarter square triangles, 3.5, not 3 1/4. So that's how I would Tuckerize this one. And again, this project gave me a lot of information. When I looked at this, it's a book that has a cute little pattern in it, and I recognized right away that there are hourglass units. And when I go to that set of instructions, I see something in the instructions that tells me that I will be trimming the hourglass units to 4 inches. So reading that, it makes me think that, oh, maybe they've already oversized the red and white squares that I need to be able to create these units. So use what I know. If I know I'm trimming it to 4 inches, that means I know that the unfinished size, that's the unfinished size, and I know that the finished size will be 3.5. And if I think about that math a little bit, 3.5 plus 1 1/4, which is the perfect size, 4 3/4 inches. Well, they're telling me to cut that size square and not giving me any wiggle room to be able to trim down. So what I'm going to do to Tuckerize this is use what I know. If I know I'm trimming to 4 inches and I know that the finished size will be 3.5, the unfinished size or the trim size is 4 inches, the finished size will be 3.5, follow down on the chart to the 5-inch size, and that's the size I'm going to cut my red and white squares in order to be able to make those hourglasses oversized and trim them down to the right size and shape. Now, there's one more pattern that I have here, and I want you to take a look at this because sometimes you have to be a little bit of a pattern detective in order to figure this one out. This is a Love of Quilting Fawns and Porter project, and I see indeed that there are hourglasses in there, but I don't have any of that information. I don't have what size they need to be. I do have, back in the cutting directions, the size of the white and the blue squares that they want me to cut, and they're telling me 5 1/4, and I can figure that out, that 5 1/4 inch cut size squares mean that they're going to be 4 inches finished, and go from there. But if you can't maybe locate that information in here, you can kind of figure out on your own what size those units need to be by looking at some other clues in the pattern. Right at the beginning, it tells me that the finished blocks are going to be 12 inches. So when I look at this diagram, I can see that these are going to be the 12-inch finished blocks, which means that each of these sections, each of the units are going to need to be 4 inches finished, which means they're going to be 4.5 inches unfinished. What does that tell me about the hourglasses? If I know the finished size that I want to create a 4-inch finished unit and trim it to 4.5. I'm going to start with blue squares and white squares to make this project that are 5.5 inches, not the 5 1/4 that they tell me to, because they're not giving me any wiggle room, and I like to have wiggle room in my projects. So I don't know if this is starting to make any sense. And I don't want to go any further with the hourglasses right now. But what I'd like you to do is think about maybe giving these a try. The next episode, I'm going to actually talk to you a little bit about how you construct hourglasses, because there are different methods that different writers, pattern writers, tell you to create them. And depending on whether you're doing a 2-color, a 3-color, or a 4-color hourglass, you might choose a different approach, but I'll always choose oversizing. So think about it. Take some practice fabric, find a pattern that has hourglass in it, make a couple of units with the size they tell you to cut, and then try that oversizing and see if you don't like it better when it's all trimmed down with a tucker trimmer to a perfect size. I'll see you for the next episode, where we're going to continue talking about hourglasses and tuckerizing those construction steps, which is also part of the program. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.